Hello, interwebs. I hope you are doing... What was that voice? What was I... Anyways, I am here to review the finale of Marvel's What If. What if the Watcher broke his oath? Vow? Oath. Vow. No. It's oath. What if he broke his oath? And apparently the answer to that question is fucking awesomeness, because that's what this episode was. And I really absolutely adored this finale. Like last week's episode, this episode kind of is everything I expected it to be on the tin in terms of plot. We get the sort of Avengers coming together, team up of all the different like main characters from across, or at least some of the main stories that we've seen throughout this entire season of What If. But unlike last week's episode, where everything kind of felt perfunctory and everything was just sort of like going through the beats to get to where it needed to be, this episode really just savored with the weird awesomeness that this was, because ultimately all it really was get these characters together and have them go punch Ultron enough until they finally defeat him. So there's not really a lot of plot here, and what that allows this episode to do is just have a lot of fun with the interactions and bringing all these different characters back and give us little moments of like hinting at like future evolutions of these characters, future events after what we saw in their sort of what if episodes that we got. And I just really loved that for this, because I cannot speak tonight. I'm just reveling in the awesomeness. So this one just felt like, because it had so little to do in terms of plot arc, I think it just really delivered in terms of just the fun, the ridiculousness of what this is, and really paying off what the what if format can do, and really showing the awesomeness that this concept can be. Because, you know, whether you loved or hated this anthology series, there's been some that I liked, some that I didn't like, and that's kind of the purpose of an anthology series. This episode really kind of shows me like this is what this thing can be, and this series can do in a way that you can't really get anywhere else in the Marvel MCU, and I just loved it for it. But let's get into some of the episode stuff so I can talk about the specifics instead of generalities here, because there's a lot of cool stuff to talk about. I love this opening bit with the assembling of the different Avengers, because again, like I said earlier, it kind of gives us little hints at the continuations of a lot of these stories, especially ones that I was most interested in. And we start off with the Captain Carter one, which was the one that I was kind of least interested in, but we get an extended little bit here, basically of her doing the opening of the Winter Soldier, basically the same sort of scene that we saw there, where they were going on the boat to stop Bartok. But I liked the little twists and differences here. I love the new Winter Soldier outfit that Carter has. I like her interaction with Natasha, and I like that it seeds like how that relationship will unfold and be utilized later on in the episode. So some good effective storytelling here, despite the fact that this is a different universe that we won't be focusing on this episode. But I love the interplay between Natasha and Carter. It's a lot of fun. It's like, oh, there we can get like a date with the guy in HR. It's like no good sentences ever started with that guy in HR. Absolutely wonderful. Honestly, it really made me want to see this movie. As much as I love the Winter Soldier and Steve, I would love to see more Carter Natasha stuff going on, because I just loved their friendships, and it also made me like really feel the sadness that a lot of the women characters in the MCU, while there are some good women characters in the MCU, they've mainly been relegated to their own separate storylines and sort of backup characters to the main heroes of their stories. And it makes me kind of sad that we don't get to see much more of just women interacting with other women within the MCU. It's kind of a sad thing, and this just kind of made me a little bit hungry for more of that within this movie, or within this little segment here. But moving on from that, we also get a little element of, we get to see Ego taking over Star-Lord in T'Challa Star-Lord's universe, and T'Challa Star-Lord saves him and rescues him, but right as the moment that the Watcher shows up, and sort of like, and I love the Watcher bursting in, everyone just being like, can you see that? He's just a huge dude. Really kind of great there. We also get a Gamora that apparently is in part of Infinity War, and she's like beefed up and powered. I was like, wait, did we see her in a What If? Apparently she was just created in here to be like a Deus Ex Machina sort of device here, which I liked how they subverted that later on. But she's able to bring the Infinity Crusher machine, that sort of the sort of like plot device, sort of literal plot device thing here, but again gets subverted later on, so I'm willing to let that slide. Though I'm saddened that we didn't get to see another character show up here instead of a character like the way it developed, like maybe the Nebula that we had seen from the T'Challa Star-Lord episode. We also get Party Thor, I love him sort of destroying all the different Ultrons. That was a lot of fun, and screaming when he sees the Watcher. And then we get them all inside of the pub from the very first episode, the same pub that Captain Carter remembers so well. And we get this wonderful little scene with like the Guardians of the Multiverse coming together, the Watcher sort of bringing them together. I think it's a lot of fun. There's a lot of really good interactions here. I won't go through all of them, but I like Thor is clearly the sort of standout of all the humor here, basically being like, I'm good at drawing unwanted attention, the ordering Chinese food, all that sort of stuff. Again, a lot of really fun interactions here, but none of it is worth like specifically calling out other than to say, that's funny. I really enjoyed it. I also like seeing the little hints of Killmonger here, sort of hinting that he has ulterior motives. And also, I should say, I liked seeing the little bit of an ending that we get to see of Killmonger's universe as well when he was pulled out, that he was basically being defeated and Wakanda had basically been overrun with Pepper and, his sister and T'Challa's sister, Shuri, coming in to save the day. So I liked at least that there's there's missing steps, and I would have loved to see that story, but it's interesting to see that at least there's some sort of resolution to that story, because I was fascinated by where that universe went. And then we have the whole crew going to this like random universe where there's not a lot of life in it, and they're sort of having one last little moment. Again, there's little funny bits here and there. Strange trying to give a speech, kind of being a really good moment there as well, and also Strange giving them the protection spells, the very, very, very OP protection spell apparently, but then Thor accidentally calls in, gets unwanted attention, again, very funny, bringing in Ultron, who's gonna try and blow them all up and kill them. And this fight that follows here, remember I said last week that I was a bit disappointed in the lack of imagination in the Watcher versus Ultron fight. I thought it would end up just kind of being punchy with rotating backgrounds. This fight here, which is honestly goes on for about 10 minutes or so, I really, really loved it. Honestly, I would even argue is probably one of the most clever fight sequences in the MCU so far. I mean, for me, it kind of is a little bit better even than the MCU fight in Avengers Endgame. I mean, it's certainly not as epic as that, but in terms of like clever things that like Doctor Strange making multiple Mjolnirs and things like that, bringing in the zombies, bringing in Zombie Scarlet Witch, which was pretty badass if you ask me. All that stuff I think worked really, really well, and I thought was just creatively inventive and visually inventive. For my money. Again, not as epic as Endgame, but I think like Endgame was ultimately a bunch of different random heroes doing random things on a CGI background, and this one the powers felt a little bit more cohesively used together, instead of like each sort of character being siloed off as in that movie. Again, that's not a knocking Endgame. I love the Endgame bit. But then during the fight, they get brought to Natasha's universe, the Natasha universe that we saw last episode with Ultron's having destroyed everything, and I love that the Natasha in this universe doesn't really believe anybody until Captain Carter steps up and like sort of like proves that her like, I'm not from your universe, but I'm your friend, you can trust me, I'm here to help. And I like, again, that this, like, friendship that sort of goes across universes and the little, like, they effectively set it up in the first scene, paid it off here really well, even with a different Natasha. I thought that worked really, really well. And again, showed me how much I would like to see more women characters coming together and actually forming friendships in the MCU. So that's just a thing going forward that this just made me very thirsty for in a non-sexual thirsty way. I mean, I'm here also, too, for the thirsty sexual women encounters in the MCU, but I'll take what I can get at this point, because Disney ain't going to give me any queerness anytime soon. Again, this fight, goes really, really well. I'm enjoying the cleverness of this, and everyone sort of working together. Again, I also like Star-Lord earlier stealing the, T'Challa Star-Lord stealing the Infinity Stone, the Power Stone. I love the shots that they had here. There was like a great one-take shot they had. I know it's animation, so the one take's a little bit easier than in real life, but it was still looked very cool, and I like the choreography of it. And I also like the shot where it just stayed on the stone while everything was happening in the background. That was also a really cool shot. So, again, it's animation, so it's less impressive on a technical level, but in terms of cinematography and clever use of camera work, I think that is top-notch, and I really deeply enjoyed it and appreciated the not only cleverness in choreography, but in clever camera usages throughout this episode. I keep wanting to say episode as well. I would love this to be a level. I'd like to play this game over the Square Enix Avengers game, because that game was not great, let's just put it mildly, but that's a side point. I also love that they end sort of Demont here, where Ultron sort of, they put the Infinity Stone Crusher on him, it gets blown up, and apparently the Infinity Crusher wasn't meant to work on these Infinity Stones. I thought that was a clever conceit and a nice little subversion, again, of that Deus Ex Machina that I alluded to before, because I was sort of like, oh, we just have this Infinity Crusher thing. I thought we had the perfectly good explanation last episode that would have fixed everything, that actually had more development, but fine, Infinity Crusher. And I like that it's actually not useful for anything. It ultimately doesn't do anything. And Ultron eventually learns that he needs to kill Doctor Strange because Doctor Strange is the one that's the most powerful here and giving everyone the protection spells. And so focuses all his energy on that. And I love that we get sort of the end emotional, or the end climax of the fight is between, again, Natasha and Captain Carter. Again, women power. I'm here for it. Women power that actually isn't like the dumb women power moment from Avengers Endgame. Like, look at all these women who we didn't give enough screen time to in other movies. It was actually like, oh, these women are actually being proactive and working together and actually doing something. Again, I don't want to overpraise this episode because it's doing like basic stuff that other MCU stuff does, but it's just with women now, and I kind of liked it. I appreciated it, and I wish the MCU would do more of it. Anyways, but I love that it was just kind of really epic with Captain Carter just running up the stairs and like grabbing Ultron's head back, and Natasha shooting an arrow, which I didn't know. I knew Natasha's skillful, but I didn't know she was that good with a bow. I mean, what do we even need Hawkeye then? If Natasha can just shoot these bows just as well as Hawkeye, why do we even need him? Evidently we don't. Anywho, just shooting him right in the eye. Thought that was cool, and Zola taking over and defeating him. And I was like, oh no, Zola's in Ultron's body. I don't know if that's better. And ultimately, again, that was proven correct. I was worried that the episode would not account for that, but it does, because then Killmonger gets the Infinity Stones, which read, again, perfectly natural to me. There was little hints, and I was wondering, it's kind of easy that Killmonger is just going to come into this group and be kind of like, oh yeah, it's all fine, when we know he's a bit power hungry as well. Even if his reasoning is something I'm sympathetic towards, he's definitely a power hungry person. And so grabbing the Infinity Stones fits naturally within him, and I like T'Challa trying to call him out on that, but Killmonger saying, you're not my actual cousin, and trying to convince others like, hey, we can do this, we can save our universe. It fits very much in line with his sort of ethos, just brought out into a galactic scale instead of just for black people on just his universe, his Earth. But then we get a stomach face Zola inside of Ultron, which I like. That I think Thor called that out. I was like, that explains the stomach face. I forget who said it. Someone said it. Stomach face. It was funny. And then we get a fight between Killmonger and Ultron, but ultimately Doctor Strange realizes like, oh, this is all part of the plan, and puts them into a pocket universe. That was really clever. I like that, and it also sets that up that these characters possibly could come back down the line. The sort of Zola Ultron and the Killmonger Ultron sort of guy. I think it'd be cool if we see them pop up maybe in season 2 of the show, which was very great. But then all the different characters go back to their own universes. We get a nice little end beat with Captain Carter sort of like wistfully things like, oh, I wish I could have wish I could have Steve, couldn't you send me back there? And that's kind of funny considering that's what Steve in the MCU proper, the Sacred Timeline, did as well. He went back in time to be with her, and I like that sort of she echoes that as well here, but she sort of goes back on the words of the Watcher and says, that they need you there, and we get a nice little moment between her and Natasha back in our universe. Again, I'm liking their sort of relationship, and that was a nice little capstone to that. But then the Natasha back in the pub says that she's not going back to her universe. There's nothing there, and you don't get to just watch us. You get involved, and I liked her calling him out on that because he should. It's kind of crappy of him to just watch these horrible things happen. But I also like that he sort of returns that back and says, no, your stories mean everything to me. It means a lot to watch your universes. It's not just me just sitting here being like a chump, just sitting here like getting my jollies. Like, no, they mean a lot to me. So I think there's sort of interesting stuff there. I'm ultimately on the Natasha side of, yeah, no, get involved. You shouldn't let people die side of things. But I liked understanding the emotionality and the reasoning that the Watcher has. I think it gives him a little bit more depth than just sort of like, I'm the guy who's going to read stories to you. I enjoyed that. And I liked Natasha getting put into an Avengers style scenario where Loki's sort of taking over the helicarrier in the beginning of the Avengers, and sort of she's replacing she can never really replace that universe as Natasha, but she is put in that universe so she can sort of help things go along there. I like that scene. I liked her beating Loki. I could have done without the like weird Samuel L. Jackson line there where he's just sort of like, I guess you're not my Natasha, but I trust you. It just felt like a little bit forced and ham-handed to sort of have a little cap moment to her episode, to her storyline, like a nice little capstone. It just didn't read to me as something that Nick Fury would have said in that moment, but whatever. It was a bit ham-fisted, but I'll allow it. I'll allow one ham-fisted moment per episode in an episode this good. And so all of that was really, really great. And then we get one little after-credit sequence where we see that Captain Carter does indeed get her happy ending because they found the iron suit that Steve in her universe was using, and presumably implied that Steve is in there. So that's a nice little ending to her storyline. I don't necessarily know if I love it as an end credits, like after credit sequence. I was really hoping for something bigger. My hope with the after credit sequence with this episode ultimately was like I hoped that they showed that this show was going to be meaningful in a sort of larger MCU sense. Like, I've been enjoying this anthology series, you know, there's some ups, some downs throughout it, but I really thought that this after credits sequence was going to like point towards, maybe it hints towards the multiverse or Loki, or just what happened in the show Loki, or Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness. Just sort of a little hint that maybe this show would have some weight beyond just it being a fun little side project for the MCU. Ultimately, we don't. It's used as sort of like a nice little end beat for Captain Carter, which maybe will come up next season, maybe won't. But ultimately a little bit disappointing in terms of after credit sequence, but not bad. It's just sort of like, oh, there was no like get hyped moment at the end of this. It was just sort of like, oh, that's sweet, which it's fine. It's fine. It's not bad. So ultimately, end of the day, I really loved this episode. I thought it was a great finale to this season of the show. It makes me excited to see the show return next season. And ultimately, looking back at this whole show, just to I'm not going to do a full season review of this show, so I'll just sort of put my thoughts on the series, at least this season right here. I liked it. I mean, it's like any anthology show that you can find. Like, even Star Wars Visions was like this, and really any anthology series is that you're going to have episodes you love, you're going to have episodes that you dislike. The episodes that I love and dislike are probably generally going to be different than other people's top lists, because anthologies, because they shift so many genres and tones, that's kind of the point of an anthology, that other people are just going to be drawn to it based on simple taste and not really necessarily equating to the quality of the story. But some people will like zombie stories, while other people will hate zombie stories. I see you, Council of Geeks, Vera. Yeah, so I think that as the show, just on a taste level, it just had a broad range that was sort of polarizing for some people. Things like, oh, this episode was great, this episode was bad, this episode was great. And so I could see that being sort of a turn off or turn on depending on each episode that you're watching. But on the whole, I thought it averaged out to be pretty good. There was stuff that I really disliked. I thought was kind of boring and silly and dumb. And a few general things that I kind of found annoying, like how sometimes the show was very willing to like just dismiss certain aspects of things, like making Thanos kind of a chump in most of the universes. But ultimately, I enjoyed it for what it was. I think now that I have my expectations tailored to what it is, like, it's not going to be this big thing. It's just a fun little anthology show to enjoy in the MCU. I liked it, and I think that that's good. I think it's good and better for the MCU to have these sort of smaller projects. I still feel like they have the weight of production of the MCU. Like, we brought in a lot of the cast members and voices from the actual MCU proper. It still felt like it was part of this fabric that the MCU is, but it doesn't necessarily need to tie into the greater MCU as a whole. It didn't need to have that huge weight that every single MCU project has to have at this point that connects to the larger whole. Even though I know I was poo-pooing that it didn't sort of have that after credit sequence that got me hyped, there is an element of a little bit of freshness in that. Even if this show ultimately, I think at the end of the day, will not be one that I, will say is like, this was the must-see thing that you need to see in the MCU. I'll more just say it's like, oh yeah, it was fun. But also, there'll be episodes here and there that if like, I want 30 minutes hanging around with some of my favorite MCU characters, get to hang out with them. I don't have time for a 2-hour movie, but I have time for 30 minutes. And I think that that'll ultimately will be for. It's more like comfort food with characters that I really love, with some greatness in there, like the Star-Lord episode, but more just enjoyable, fun romps. And that's what I really feel the series is for. So that's my thoughts on this episode and the series as a whole, at least at season 1 of the series. What did you think, though? Did you love this episode? Did you love this season as a whole? Are you excited for season 2 of What If? I believe the next Marvel project we have on the horizon is it's either Spider-Man, No Way Home, or Hawkeye. I forget which comes up first, but I'm excited for both of those. So what are your thoughts? Are you excited for either of those projects? I will hopefully be reviewing Hawkeye as it comes out. Don't forget, in 2 weeks I'll probably be starting to review Star Trek Prodigy on this channel. I'll also probably be reviewing some other stuff now that this show is done, but Prodigy will probably be the big thing, and also Star Trek Discovery coming up, and Hawkeye, like I said. So all it's coming up on the horizon. Beyond all of that, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. I also have a Patreon page that you can support me. I also have a secondary another channel. This is my secondary channel called Jessie Gender, where I do more video essay type stuff. But beyond all of that, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you, as always, live long and stay sexy.